Welcome to Remix EQ Live, where we're amplifying equity with a mix of information, interviews, and inspiration. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Tate, and today I am live from Savannah, Georgia, where I live. So, for those who are joining us today, please drop a greeting of choice in the comments. Let us know where you are joining from and the equity work that you do or aspire to do. And remember, Remix EQ Live is an experience that's meant to be shared. So I encourage you to hit the share button and invite your people, your network, your family, your friends, your peeps to join us. And while those comments are flowing out and those invitations too, I want to remind you that Remix EQ Live is an opportunity for us to connect and build community with each other around the equity work that's being performed throughout the world. And we do this by centering the work. That is, our guests and viewers share examples of what they do in their role or position as a way to illustrate the innovative ways they advance equity in the spaces in which they live, work, and play. So throughout the show and in the comments, I invite you to also share what you do to make this world a more just place. So today we have our second interview show of season 2 of Remix EQ Live. Josh Edelman has graced our stage, our platform. He's a senior advisor with the U.S. program at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And you are all in for a treat as we rally around Josh to learn more about his pathways and philanthropic practices and educational equity. So with that said, I welcome you to the show, Josh Edelman. And I invite you to introduce yourself. And as you do, please share any career twists and turns that have led you to your current role.
Thank you so much, Erica. I'm very excited to be part of the Remix EQ community today. As Erica said, I'm Josh Edelman, and I work at the Gates Foundation as a senior advisor for our U.S. program. To introduce myself, I sort of start with sort of my background, how I identify as a biracial male and a Washingtonian, very proud Washingtonian, which means I'm living in DC and from DC, not the broader DC area. Also, very important to understand that my family anchors me. I have two wonderful daughters who are 21 and 19, Elika and Zoe, both in college, and my wife, Heather. The way I see myself beyond sort of my background, I identify as a practitioner, even though I've unfortunately moved a little bit farther away from the classroom over the years, having been a high school teacher, high school principal, and district leader in a couple urban systems. Been at Gates the last 11 years as a K-12 place-based program officer, working mostly in Tennessee and Florida, and then co-led an investment portfolio focused on K-12 students and systems. And now I'm a senior advisor, as was mentioned by Erica. Three key twists and turns. Great question, Erica. I think the first was kind of moving from teacher to principal. I sort of realized after 10 years of teaching that I was having huge impact, I hope, on the students in my classroom, but I wanted to have impact at a broader systemic level. And being a principal allowed me to sort of be that person who was empowering teachers and affecting a whole school environment as opposed to just one individual classroom. Second twist and turn was sort of coming out of my DC public schools experience, where a old friend who is the head of my principal prep program called me at just the right time about the Gates opportunity. And if not for that, I would never have obviously gotten involved with philanthropy. And the key kind of lesson out of that was that relationships matter and timing matters as well. And lastly, it was the move that I made within Gates from being a senior program officer, which I loved, to being involved with a portfolio of investments and being a deputy director. And that came because we had a new boss that came into the foundation, the K-12 team, who offered the opportunity. So if not for a mix of the people I would have run across or sort of better understanding of where I needed to go in my own journey, these twists and turns would have led me in different directions. But I'm excited to be where I am.
We're excited that you're there, and thank you so much for sharing that. We try to normalize career twists and turns on the show because they, I think are really key to finding the path in which you do your best work and you feel your best doing it. But I also appreciate you highlighting the different ways that you affect education, right? You were a teacher, a principal, and then even your different roles within philanthropy. So thank you. That's something we can definitely learn from. For those who are just joining, this is Remix EQ Live, and we are amplifying equity through a mix of information, interviews, and inspiration. So after Josh's introduction and his twists and turns, I know that you are sharing and inviting others to tune in. And of course, I invite you to interact with us, post any comments, ask questions as we dive into this interview. You are part of this Remix EQ Live experience. Now we center the work. So this is our opportunity to learn from Josh about his approaches and strategies for investing in educational equity. So Josh, in your role as a senior advisor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, how are you addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, within the foundation?
That's a really important question, Eric, and I appreciate having a chance to talk about it. One of the key things that's been happening over the past several years at the foundation, which I'm actively able to sort of work with, is a focus on sort of talent development. And we are developing a new program for all recently hired and eventually all current investors or program officers, folks that interface with grantees and partners in the field. And the reason we're doing is we have a belief that people are having kind of different types of experiences, especially if you're a BIPOC leader coming in the foundation, a first-time philanthropist, first-time college goer yourself. And we wanted to make sure there was more of an equitable experience coming in. So we're focusing on trying to help people be more equity-centered investors in the way that they do their work and foundation navigators without having to kind of lose themselves in the process. So that sort of focus on talent development with a lens towards kind of equalizing the experience at Gates and allowing folks to be better at the work they're doing with the field is one key way that we're addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the foundation. Secondly, very actively involved with a division-wide working group around DEI. And the work there is focusing on a combination of making sure that we're defining the terms we're using so that we're going out to the field with consistency with the way we're talking about key aspects of equity in particular. We're also focusing a lot on partner equity orientation, which means we're trying to better understand like literally who is in our portfolio and what their stance around equity is. And that's meant to help us reflect on who we're investing in now versus in the future, and hopefully provide us some really important data to push us to think about the portfolios we want to have, given the impact that we're trying to strive for Black, Latino, and students from low-income backgrounds. And the last thing is we're spending a lot of time kind of putting together what we call aligned investment resources, trying to equip our program officers, our investors, to have curated tools at their fingertips that help them center equity in their investments. So an example would be when we're going out to the field, instead of like going towards those partners you've always worked with, we want to offer you a landscape document of partners of all backgrounds and experience, but especially who are proximate to the community with lived experience, for them to have in mind as they're thinking about who they should give grants to and how to develop proposals with them. So across a variety of different things around talent and the way we interface with the field and the resources we use to invest, those are all things that we're really putting a lot of time and effort into right now, Erica.
That's great. Thank you for sharing about this work. It's, we don't often get to hear what's happening internally within an organization, but over the past few years, we've heard more and more about like DEI work that's happening or needs to happen in organizations. And so I appreciate your descriptions of the different types of work, from helping like talent within the organization navigate so that they can have like we were saying, like equitable experience and access to all the resources and support there, but also even this idea of like when we talk like this definitional work, like when you're trying to define these terms so everyone is speaking the same language. I think when we hear about work directly from people who are engaged in it in this space, it really helps us kind of envision the work in very concrete ways. So thank you for that. So I started to talk a little bit about it in terms of like who you're investing in and how you're finding different partners, but how else has this internal DEI work impacted how the foundation is investing in educational equity?
Well, the last example I gave, Erica, with the aligned investment resources, I think the number one thing that we're really trying to think differently about is like who we're investing in. It's very easy because of the nature of our processes to engage partners who will be really good at filling out proposal document forms and will be really good at navigating our processes. And we want to make sure that that's not driving us to the same partners we've always invested in. It doesn't matter whether they're great or not. We want to make sure we're bringing into our portfolios partners who have that lived experience, that proximity to the communities in which we're trying to support growth. So really thinking about proximate leaders and honoring the expertise of contextual actors. I think those are things that we're putting more and more time and effort into, because we think that will lead to, impact overall. I think the other thing that we're spending a lot of time internally on is focusing a lot more on the what, more than the how. People, I think, in the past have sort of said, oh, the Gates Foundation is here, and they have an opinion about not just strategy, which is their right, it's their money, but also about how you use the money. And I think that's a very, very slippery slope if you're trying to sustain the work beyond the investment. And we're really kind of getting smarter and realizing that we have to set the parameters for the investment, work really hard together with our partners, but then create the space for them to make sense of what to do with that investment. Because if they don't, we've seen many times, Erica, where the money gets spent during the investment period. As soon as the grant's over, folks go back to what they were doing before because they never built ownership for the work themselves. The power dynamics are also very important for us to keep in mind. And we're working very hard to support our investors to understand people are making assumptions when someone from the Gates Foundation is coming to town or is having a conversation. We're really trying to focus on our investors understanding that and having more knowledge of what it means to really be in partnership and to co-construct. And lastly, that co-construction, there's a big, big effort right now, as there always should have been, on trust building. It's the most important currency to working with the field in a way that's empowering. We want to focus on sustainability from the outset. We want to keep trust front and center. So there's a lot of things we're trying to do. It's slow going, but we're having really good and important conversations, Erica, and we're raising up promising practices so others can learn from them.
No, thank you so much. We have a comment. Brianna Matches. She says, hello. She's loving the conversation, working to change the perspective around equity and considering folks with lived experience. Yes, I definitely appreciate how the focus on those who are proximate to the work and that their experience can shed light and insight in what these equitable outcomes look like. We have another comment just wishing us a happy Friday. Yay, it's Friday. Thank you. Hello, Regine. Welcome back. So thank you so much. You shared so many things. I'm very excited, especially the idea around trust and relationship building and keeping that front and center and helping the partners that you have sustain beyond the investment. I think those are just really key principles in thinking about equity in communities. But I also wanted to, since you're here and you have such extensive experience in education as a practitioner, but also in your recent work in philanthropy, I think I want to take advantage of the opportunity to glean any insights from you about advancing equity in schools. So in your experience, what are your top 3 promising practices for organizations or partnerships seeking to move the needle on equity in education?
No, it's a really important question, Eric, and a really hard one that needs to be continually focused on, I think. And ironically, a lot of the things that we're doing at the foundation, I think, are really good for folks to be doing in the field as well. So I mentioned in the last back and forth we had about the importance of sort of working with proximate leaders and honoring their voice and trusting folks in context. I think the first thing I would highlight as a promising practice is that for system and school leaders, you need to work with stakeholders who are closest to the problem that you're trying to address. And it really starts, if you're an educator in particular, the system or school level, listening to students directly, hearing what they want. And it's important to also engage other stakeholders so that you create this belief the work is being done with them and not to them. I think so often we come in with a focus on solutions, and the message being sent is that we already know what to do, and so just follow us, as opposed to you're here, you're in the community, you're proximate to the problems, and learning from them, putting them in the role of being experts. So deeply knowing stakeholders in your audience. I think it's also important to think about not just focusing on building skill, but also building mindset in relation to the folks you're working with. Because the goal is that you're addressing problems not just in this one moment, but repeatedly. So working directly with stakeholders close to the problem has a lot of nuance behind it, but listening a lot, doing the work with the community, problems before solutions, knowing your audience, and then really focusing on building mindsets and skill sets is sort of the first thing I'd say, with a lot of kind of underneath details behind it. I think the second thing I'd offer is that you have to make sure you're looking at the system beyond the issue at hand. What is the broader structural barriers behind why that problem is a problem, why that issue persists, and focusing on that broader ecosystem, I'd say, is the second thing that organizations or partnerships need to focusing on that's promising. And the last thing, which I don't think is going to be a surprise, is you have to look at data regularly. And when I say data, I don't just mean quantitative data. I mean qualitative data. I mean talking to stakeholders. I mean looking at things regularly before the year is out or before a long amount of time has gone by. You need to look at the proximate, interim, formative data that lets you hear the story of your progress so you can do something about it in real time. We talk about pre-mortems versus post-mortems, making sure you're looking at data when you still have the chance to kind of deal with something that's alive and beating right in front of you. So that's the third thing I would say beyond working directly with stakeholders closest to the problem and addressing the system beyond the issue at hand is looking at data regularly to make refinements in real time.
Yeah, no, that is great. Those are three great points that we can really rally around and really think about in our work. Yeah, I appreciate the researcher. My researcher soul's like, yes, data and all types of data, right, to inform how you're doing that work and to keep you connected to the people in which the work is impacting. So I appreciate I'm so glad we had the chance to ask you that question. It's really like just the perspective that you've had over your career. It's really, really informative. One area that we like to explore on the show is how identity and a commitment to equity intersect. So you spent your career working to improve educational outcomes for students, which include Black children and young adults. And then you yourself were a biracial man who works in philanthropy, who has more recently which philanthropy as a field has more recently diversified in terms of like increased representation of people of color in the field. So what has been your experience in educational philanthropy as a biracial man?
No, I really love this question because you can't separate out, kind of your work in a context from your identity. It's incredibly important. So I mentioned before that we're focusing on talent and trying to equip our recently hired program officers to be able to navigate the foundation. And one of the key things we're saying is that the goal of the navigation is to find the line between assimilation and code switching. So as a biracial man who identifies as Black because of the way society kind of sees me, we don't want people. I didn't want to come in and sort of have to become something else to be successful. And so the key thing for me is knowing in my context what I have to do to be successful and how do I meet that line of success while being my authentic self. So that's sort of the first thing I would highlight about my experience is trying to find that line. And it's not always easy because you go into certain meetings with certain people, you want to kind of like knock it out of the park and you find yourself talking in certain ways with certain vocabulary. It's like, that's not the way I normally talk. So figuring out ways to be authentic, but also meet the organization where it's at, I think is one key part of my experience to date. A second is sort of, we've talked about this a little bit from the standpoint of knowing your community. If you're an organization, you have to know the audience within philanthropy. I mean, we're very large. We're the largest foundation in the world, almost 1,800 people across multiple different, continents. And when I'm talking to somebody in a certain team or in a certain role or in a certain place in the hierarchy, I have to understand what success looks like to them. I have to differentiate, the way I come across, again, authentically, to meet them where they are and to think about whether there's a dynamic where I have to manage up to somebody because of what they're having on their plate versus a peer versus a supervisee. So I think the second part of my experience as a biracial man has been to think about deeply knowing my audience, understanding hierarchy, and understanding power dynamics. I think the last thing I will say on this really important question, Eric, is you got to build a social network. You got to have both folks who have your back, who are people of color like yourself with shared experiences, but you have to have a lot of majority allies as well, team allies who can sort of see the system from their vantage point too. And having that social network means you have both guidance and mentorship and coaching, but you also have a place to have emotional release when you're trying to make sense of a moment that might not have gone perfectly. So yeah, those are the key things for me has been that line between assimilation and code switching being found and knowing my audience and then having a lot of professional friends that I can tap into.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that experience. I asked that question because I think that many people who are working in the field who identify with the communities that they're serving feel that way. And I like the point about how do you stay authentic, but also stay in the space and make an impact as you're navigating through whatever organization or system you're in. And it's something that is a theme for you, right? These relationships, right? Creating your social network, right? Having those in place, both in terms of people who can coach and guide you. But I really appreciate the comment you made about having folks in which you can have an emotional release. This work, I agree. This work is hard to do, especially when you're doing it from whatever place has driven you to do it. Like you might even have the shared experiences with the communities that you're serving. So having that space and creating that space to feel the feels, right? When that happens, to be able to talk about them and express them. I think that's just such an important lesson. I mean, you talked about sustainability in terms of like you invest in a program, and after that investment, hopefully those organizations can continue, but also we have to like do the work that allows for us to sustain, right? And be able to make that impact. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to like reiterate it and amplify it, because it's really important to this work if we're gonna, stay in it, right? And stay committed and work to make the change that we need. So thank you. Other thing is, Remix EQ Live is at its core a learning community. And so we come together and we really want to learn from each other, because these experiences are so rich and the expertise. And I think we all share this goal of really making the world a better place. You're a lifelong educator, which I know that you are a lifelong learner. And so I'd love for you to share with us your learning journey in the field of philanthropy.
So this was a question that I loved as well, because it was so hard to sort of think about and boil this down into, a bite-sized answer. I think coming in, you want to see yourself as being a product of your experiences. So I went into my role as a program officer my first 6 years at the Gates, thinking that, hey, I'm a practitioner. I've been a teacher. I've been a principal. I've been in districts. This will be great. I'll go in and folks will really want to learn with me and they'll want to be my partner. And I didn't understand, in most cases, the power dynamics were such. I'm basically a walking ATM machine. And so to humanize myself, which is sort of my first kind of learning from my several years at the foundation, I had to listen and then listen and then listen more and be present and be willing to share who I am. It doesn't mean, going into copious details that are not appropriate, but like, we have common threads regardless of where we are from a standpoint of our professional roles, the cities we live in. Share about family, share over meals. I got to the point where when I was in the field, I never went had a meal by myself, because people will just start sharing what they want you to know about them and their work if you do it over food or a drink. And the last thing about sort of humanizing yourself beyond listening and being present and sharing is just being a learner, coming across like, help me understand what you are trying to do. Help me understand what you're learning. And coming across as a learner, I think, is really important to being human. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I think, is that I mentioned before in one of the questions you asked, Erica, about this idea of the what versus the how. And, we all feel like we know some things, and we go in and we start to sort of offer suggestions about things that might be worth trying. A suggestion coming from a program officer is seen as more of a suggestion. So part of being, part of my learning journey is understanding how to empower and not to enable by doing. Because when you suggest something, power dynamics are saying, do it. And that is not the intention, but that's how it's seen and heard. So showing and not telling is a key piece that I learned, and being flexible on what the vision around the how is, because people need to struggle. If they're going to go from kind of understanding something to owning it, and seeing the strategy work associated with an investment as their own, it has to get messy. They have to be able to sort of make sense of it in their own terms. So empowering versus enabling, showing, not telling is sort of the second thing I think I've learned a lot about in the last 10 years. And then lastly, you said, Eric, I'll say it again, you have to think about sustainability from the outset. If you're not thinking along those lines as you're designing the grant before you even start the work, you won't be thinking about what happens 1, 2, 3 years, down the road when the investment's over. And that to me is the real work. The work is, how do you help folks embrace this work as their own as they're starting to do it? And you're going to act and do differently as a program officer if you have that in mind. So sustainability from the outset is something I've learned a lot about. I'm not sure I'm perfect at doing that, but I'm certainly keeping it top of mind every step of the way.
Oh my gosh, yes, those are great points. We have an audience member, viewer that said, I love that. I love when people use exclamation points. Yes. Becoming human, listening, being present helps build the trust with those we work with. Great points. Definitely. Thank you. I was thinking as you were sharing those, I was like, these are great points in the field of philanthropy, but I think they're great points across all fields in doing this work. Gloria Struthers says, hello, hey! She's a past Remix EQ Live guest.
Oh,
She was on our show for entrepreneurship. Good to see you again. She also agrees with your points. She's she's like in systems, and she thinks systems and management. I mean, we had a long conversation on a show about it before, but yeah, so they're very centered and strategic. That makes sense. So thank you so much. Oh, so very glad. And actually, we're coming to the close of the show, but if there are any questions or comments that you guys have as you're watching the show for Josh, this is your time. Connect with him. This is a great conversation. So we try our best to make sure that every episode is an episode where guests like you, Josh, are dropping knowledge and inspiration to make the world a more just place. And you've done just that. I mean, you've shared your story, your practices, I think your learnings. As well as your experiences. And we very much appreciate that. I think there are many things to walk away from this and take back into the work that we're doing in communities to make them more just. So I'd love for you to drop one more piece of inspiration on us. So what inspires your continued commitment and pursuit of educational equity?
yeah, this is a question I think a lot about. It's what we call my why, our why, when it comes to talking with peers or, with folks in the field. I mean, for me, it's simple. I mentioned before my 21 and 19-year-old daughters, and they've had amazing opportunities because of the privilege I have and because of the access and the knowledge, the social capital, cultural capital we have. My why is I want all kids to have those same opportunities. That's what drives my continued commitment and pursuit of educational equity. It shouldn't be just for kids, my kids. It should be for all kids. And that's important to me. And I keep striving because I want to know, I believe strongly that we'll be a better, more just society if more young people are empowered to lead their own communities. Simple as that. Even if they are educated incredibly well, have access, I also want them to empowered to believe that they can go back to their communities and they can make them better. And the more that we're inspiring that, that keeps me committed.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Oh, I appreciate it. It's just, I'm like, I want to jot down all the things and post them. But I think, no, it's great. You've shared so much about the work that you've done, and really not just thinking about like how you're impacting today, but really how you can make an impact for tomorrow. And so listening to your why and your children as inspiration, and all children as inspiration for working towards this, just really resonates and just feels complete. So I thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate you being on this show. Yeah, I appreciate what you've shared with us. I think that those who are watching are definitely going to walk away with it. So please, please, please come back again. And, we'll remix you up with the new guests as you continue on in your career, as you have more information to share. We'd love to hear it. So we appreciate very much. Marsha, hey, Marsha. She says, thank you, Josh and Erica. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate it. I will be back on Friday, September 9th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, and we will be remixing Ayodele Harrison and Dr. Chris Small for an episode on Black male leadership in education. So watch your feed, check your inbox so that you have the details to tune into the next show. Until then, please visit the Remix EQ Live webpage for past episodes and more information about our inspiring guests like Josh and upcoming shows. I also encourage you to check out the first show of the season to learn why Raleigh is the battle cry for this season of Remix EQ Live. And while you're there, please poke around the website and learn more about my business, Blue Knowledge, which advances equity in schools and communities. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. And of course, you can connect to me. Oh, we have a few more comments coming in. Yes, David Sneed. Hello. He says, outstanding conversation. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so people are still coming in. Daniel Ellison, good to see you again. Thank you. Regine says, great discussion. Thank you both. Yes, wonderful. Yes. I'm so excited. I'm like so sad it's coming to an end, but so excited to have had these short 30 minutes to talk with you about your experiences and your perspectives. And again, I'm serious. You should come back. I want to thank the Remix EQ Live community for your engagement and your comments. And your encouragement and your rally, for which keeps us very inspired to make the world a more just place. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Tate, and this is Remix EQ Live, and we'll see you next time.